Have you ever stood at the crossroads of temptation, feeling that magnetic pull towards something you know might not serve your highest good? That moment when your deeper wisdom whispers, "Wait," yet desire screams, "Now"? We all face these pivotal moments. The chocolate cake when we're trying to nourish our body. The impulsive purchase when we're saving for something meaningful. The reactive words when patience would heal. By the end of our journey together today, you'll discover a profound framework for navigating temptation, not through rigid willpower, but through a deeper understanding of what's really happening beneath the surface of desire. What if I told you that each temptation isn't just a test, but a messenger? A sacred invitation to understand parts of yourself longing to be seen, heard, and integrated. Temptation exists in that charged space between immediate gratification and our deeper values. It's not the enemy, it's a teacher wearing a challenging disguise. When temptation arrives, it speaks in the language of urgency. This can't wait. You need this now. Just this once. Notice how it collapses time, making this moment feel like your only opportunity. The Buddha described this as the difference between sukha and dukkha, between genuine happiness and the temporary sensation of pleasure that ultimately leads to suffering. What's fascinating is how our brain chemistry plays into this ancient wisdom. Dopamine doesn't actually spike when we receive reward. It surges in anticipation of reward. The neuroscience reveals something profound. We're often more attached to wanting than to having. The chase, not the catch, creates the strongest neurological response. Take a moment to reflect on a recurring temptation in your life. What does it promise you? Security? Relief? Connection? Excitement? Validation? What deeper hunger lives beneath the surface craving? Our temptations are paradoxically both deeply personal and universally human. Carl Jung would say they emerge from both our individual shadows and our collective unconscious patterns. Every time you are tempted to react in the same old way, ask yourself if you want to be a prisoner of the past or a pioneer of the future. These words from Deepak Chopra invite us to see temptation as a crossroads. Consider the metaphor of temptation as a compass, not pointing north, but pointing toward our unintegrated wounds and unmet needs. What is your most persistent temptation trying to show you? Think of your most familiar temptations as messengers carrying encrypted notes from your deeper self. Their appearance signals something important requires your conscious attention. Imagine each temptation as a child tugging at your sleeve, desperate to be acknowledged. Not because the desire itself must be fulfilled, but because the underlying need deserves recognition. The psychologist Carl Rogers observed that what we resist persists. When we judge our temptations as shameful rather than informative, we drive them deeper into shadow where they gain strength. What happens when we shift from battling temptation to befriending it? When we approach with curiosity instead of judgment? The entire internal landscape transforms. I invite you to pause now. Breathe deeply. Consider how your relationship with temptation might change if you viewed it not as an adversary, but as a misguided ally trying to meet a legitimate need. When temptation arises, it never exists in isolation. It emerges within a context of triggers, unmet needs, and habitual patterns that have been rehearsed over time. The philosopher Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Yet mastery doesn't come through suppression. It emerges through understanding the underlying mechanics of desire. For every temptation, There exists a trigger: environmental, emotional, social, or physiological. These triggers become doorways through which temptation enters our conscious awareness. Consider Jack, who finds himself scrolling social media whenever anxiety rises. The temptation isn't really about the phone. It's about escaping uncomfortable emotions that feel too overwhelming to face. Or Sarah, who overspends whenever she feels invisible in her relationships. The shopping bags aren't just containing products. They're holding temporary relief from a deeper wound of unworthiness. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, points out that our environments shape our behaviors far more than willpower. We don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. This means that constantly fighting temptation through sheer willpower is fundamentally a flawed strategy. It's like trying to bail water from a boat without plugging the leak. The cost of yielding to momentary temptations often extends far beyond the moment. Short-term relief frequently transforms into long-term regret, creating a painful cycle of temporary pleasure and persistent dissatisfaction. William James noted, "The greatest discovery of my generation is that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind." Temptation reveals our most automatic attitudes. When we repeatedly surrender to the same temptations, we're not just making isolated choices, we're reinforcing neural pathways that make similar choices more likely in the future. Ask yourself, what are the hidden costs of my most persistent temptations? Not just in external consequences, but in how they shape my relationship with myself and my capacity for choice. Consider how temptation creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding contradictory beliefs. We want health, yet crave what undermines it. We value integrity, yet bend our principles. This internal conflict consumes enormous psychological energy. The mental negotiation, rationalization, guilt, and justification create a background exhaustion many of us have learned to consider normal. Viktor Frankl reminds us that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And that space is our power to choose our response. Temptation attempts to collapse that vital space. Pause now and visualize that space between stimulus and response growing wider within you. Feel the freedom that exists in that expanded awareness, that sacred pause where genuine choice becomes possible. Now that we understand temptation's mechanics and costs, let's explore practical wisdom for transforming our relationship with desire. Remember, the goal isn't suppression but integration and conscious choice. First, practice the sacred pause. When temptation arises, breathe deeply and create a moment of spaciousness before responding. Even 3 conscious breaths can change your neurological state. In that pause, ask, what need is this temptation trying to meet? Perhaps it's connection, relief, stimulation, validation, or escape. Naming the legitimate need helps separate it from the specific form of satisfaction. The psychologist Marshall Rosenberg taught that all human behavior attempts to meet universal needs. Temptation simply represents an unconscious strategy to fulfill these needs, often in ways that create unintended consequences. Try this practice. When temptation strikes, place your hand on your heart and ask, what do I really need right now? This gesture activates your parasympathetic nervous system, creating both physiological and emotional regulation. Remember Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching, the seed of suffering in you may be strong, but don't wait until you have no more suffering before allowing yourself to be happy. This wisdom reminds us that we don't need to eliminate all temptation to find peace. We simply need to relate to it differently, with mindfulness, compassion, and a growing capacity for conscious choice. Consider creating what psychologists call implementation intentions, simple if-then plans that prepare you for temptation before it strikes. If I feel lonely in the evening, then I'll call a friend rather than online shop. The Stoic philosopher Seneca advised, associate with people who make you better. Our social environments profoundly influence our capacity to navigate temptation with wisdom rather than reactivity. Find accountability partners who understand your deeper aspirations, not just your surface goals. Share with them not only what temptations you're working with, but why they matter to you. Sometimes the wisest approach is environmental design. Don't test willpower unnecessarily. Restructure your environment to make higher choices easier and temptations less accessible or immediately available. Ancient wisdom and modern psychology converge on a powerful truth. Visualization creates neural pathways similar to actual experience. Regularly visualize yourself responding to temptation with centered awareness rather than reactivity. The psychologist Carl Jung noted that what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. Resistance creates relationship. Consider instead the practice of acknowledgement without engagement. Like watching clouds pass across the sky, we can observe temptations arise and dissolve in the field of awareness without grasping or rejecting them. Martha Beck suggests asking, is this choice aligned with my integrity? Not as a moralistic question, but as a practical inquiry into what brings genuine coherence to your being. Remember that neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to create new pathways, works in your favor. Each time you respond differently to temptation, you're literally rewiring your brain toward greater freedom. I invite you to reflect on a recent experience with temptation. How did it appear? What did it promise? How did you respond? What might be possible with a different approach? See if you can hold this inquiry with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. The quality of your attention creates the container for transformation. Transform your relationship with temptation by creating meaningful rituals of fulfillment around your genuine needs. If you crave excitement, schedule adventures. If it's rest, create sacred space for genuine renewal. Remember, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. Many of our most persistent temptations reveal our deepest disconnections, both from others and from parts of ourselves. The next time temptation visits, remember this. It carries a message worth deciphering. Not to simply indulge or repress, but to understand with compassion and respond with wisdom. Temptation will always be part of the human experience. But with practice, it transforms from a source of struggle to a doorway of self-knowledge, from a battleground to a classroom of the soul. We've journeyed through the landscape of temptation, not as something to conquer through sheer force, but as a messenger carrying valuable information about our deeper needs and unintegrated aspects. Remember that each moment of temptation offers a choice point, not just between indulgence and restraint, but between unconscious reaction and conscious response, between old patterns and new possibilities. The spiritual teacher Ram Dass offered this simple wisdom. The quieter you become, the more you can hear. In the quiet space between temptation and response lies a wisdom waiting to be heard. Today, I invite you to see your temptations with new eyes, not as enemies to vanquish or weaknesses to overcome, but as guides pointing toward what within you is asking for attention and integration. The next time desire pulls strongly, pause, breathe, feel the aliveness of that moment of choice. And remember that true freedom isn't the absence of temptation, but the presence of conscious awareness in its midst.